So we're going to look at bacteria again, and this time we're going to focus on the good aspects of bacteria as well as the bad. You know, we hear a lot about the bad things that bacteria cause, like all sorts of diseases and illnesses, and how they cause food spoilage and things like that, but there's also a lot of good bacteria out there, and bacteria that are absolutely required for our health and well-being. One of the ones that you've probably heard of is something called probiotics, and these are bacteria that we actually need in order to survive and thrive. And comparatively speaking, you know, you hear a lot about bacteria, but there's actually only a handful of bad bacteria out there. The majority of bacteria are actually quite good for us. It's actually estimated that scientists have only even discovered about 1 to 10% of the total bacteria that there are out there. So there's still a lot to be discovered and found, and we need to keep in mind that there's not just bad bacteria, but there's also all sorts of good bacteria out there. So like I said, there's all sorts of advantages of bacteria and good bacteria out there. And one of the advantages that bacteria have is we use them quite a bit commercially to make certain products. So one of those products, for instance, is cheese and yogurt. Numerous microorganisms, bacteria, yeast, mold, they're present in cheese. But bacteria specifically play a very key role in the physiochemical and the aromatic transformation that occurs in cheese production. So Lactococcus and Lactobacillus, and if you think back to when we were naming bacteria, you should be able to look at those two words and have a sense of what that structure would look like. So remember what coccus would look like and bacillus would look like. But anyways, these two bacteria, these are added to actually convert milk to cheese, among many other things. Some of the other things that we use them for to make vinegar, methane, acetone, and we also use bacteria, genetically engineered bacteria specifically, to mass produce medical supplies, and this has a huge impact on us. So making things like antibiotics, insulin, growth hormones, and vaccines. Not very long ago, if you were diabetic, the insulin your doctor prescribed would have come from a pig. And if you required a human growth hormone, for instance, it would have come from a human cadaver. And that is very, very costly, not only to mention, you know, for some people that might be an ethical issue, or they may find it a little bit creepy, or whatever the case may be. So now we can actually make these medicines instead of having to use animal resources or use cadavers, which is a huge advantage. So another way that bacteria can be very beneficial to us is to clean up industrial toxic waste. And that process is called bioremediation. And this is where we can use microorganisms to remove pollutants from the atmosphere. So microbes can actually be used, and they will use the contaminants as a source of food and energy and break them down into simpler, less toxic compounds. So they can actually eat the oil from an oil spill, for instance, or eat toxins in soil and degrade pesticides. So this has huge implications and is very, very beneficial to us. And if you have a look at the picture at the bottom here, you've got the bacteria in the products eating the oil and the hydrocarbon waste. The microbes will digest and metabolize this waste, turning it into water and harmless gas. And then finally, the microbes release the water and the gases back into nature. Another way bacteria can be very beneficial is they can actually recycle dead organisms. And what they can do then is decompose these organisms into simpler elements which will actually fertilize the soil. So this classification is called a saprophyte, and this is really any organism. It could be a plant, a fungus, a bacteria, it could be anything, but they actually obtain their nutrients from dead or non-living organic matter and then break it down and fertilize the soil. So that's very beneficial. Fifth way here, the natural flora in your small and large intestine have all sorts of bacteria, and they help you digest your food. They help you make vitamins B and K, which are incredibly important. They provide competition for pathogenic bacteria. So this is a big one. Pathogenic, remember, if you think back to a few lessons ago, that means disease causing. So if you've got the good bacteria in your small and your large intestine, they will actually compete with any pathogenic bacteria that come in, and hopefully they will win that competition. So it's very important to have those. So that's where you'll hear things like taking your probiotics is very important, getting that good bacteria in there to help you break down your food and also provide competition for the pathogenic bacteria. The sixth way, this is nitrogen fixation. We're not going to go into this very much, but really this is just a process where nitrogen gas gets converted into nitrates in soil, and that actually helps fertilize plants. So now the disadvantages of bacteria. Sadly, there are all sorts of disadvantages when it comes to bacteria, even though there's plenty of advantages that we can talk about. The two key disadvantages really is disease and food spoilage. Now, disease, there's all sorts of diseases that are caused by bacteria. Some of the examples that we're going to be talking about: strep throat, flesh-eating disease, botulism, tetanus, that sort of thing. If you look at that fairly disturbing photo on the upper right of the slide, that is actually an example of necrotizing fasciitis or flesh-eating disease, which is a terrifying bacteria. And the second one here is food spoilage. So remember when we talked about binary fission, how under ideal conditions, some bacteria can actually replicate in 20 minutes. Well, that can happen and cause all sorts of problems when it comes to food spoilage. So all they really need is nice warm environment, some moisture and some food, and they're off, right? They're reproducing by binary fission and growing out of control. So what I'm about to show you, some of you may find a little bit disturbing, some of you may find it really interesting. So if you have a weak stomach at all, or you don't want to see any disturbing visual images, feel free to stop the slideshow at this point. We're just going to go into some of the different diseases like flesh-eating disease and botulism and tetanus. And there'll be lots of YouTube videos for you to watch, and hopefully there's nothing too disturbing for you. But if you are somebody who is impacted by these things, please don't feel like you have to carry on with the slideshow at this point, okay? Flesh-eating disease is caused by a bacteria called necrotizing fasciitis, and it's an infection that results in the death of your body's soft tissues. And this is a very severe disease, and it has a very sudden onset, and not only that, but it spreads incredibly quickly. So the symptoms of this will include like a red or a purple skin in the infected area. You will have severe pain, you will have fever and vomiting. And as you can see from these pictures, this is not a very nice bacteria at all. It eats away at the tissues very, very quickly, and it spreads very quickly. And I mean, if you Google some of the images online, which I don't necessarily recommend, but if you do, you'll notice that these two pictures here aren't even the most severe cases. So this is not a nice bacteria at all. If you're interested in learning more about necrotizing fasciitis, there is a YouTube video for you to watch. So if you just click that link, it'll give you a little bit more information on this disease. The next one we're going to talk about is botulism. And botulism is a fairly rare but potentially fatal illness caused by a toxin produced by the bacteria Clostridium botulinum. And this disease begins with weakness, blurred vision, you'll feel tired, you'll have trouble speaking. And it can really be spread in a couple of different ways. So one of them is by bacterial spores, which can be found in both soil and water. You can also get foodborne botulism, and this happens when the toxin is actually eaten. There's infant botulism and wound botulism. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can get it, but one of the ones you've probably heard about is getting it through improperly preserved food. So one of the things that you have to be very careful of is your food preparation methods. And so prevention is to be really cautious with how you prepare your foods. The toxin, even though the toxin itself is not an organism, it is destroyed by heating by more than 85 degrees Celsius or 185 degrees Fahrenheit for longer than 5 minutes. So that's one of the ways that you can make sure that you won't be exposed to this toxin. Honey also contains this organism, and it is that reason, or that toxin, sorry, is for that reason that honey should never be fed to children under 12 months of age. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is anthrax. And anthrax is an infection caused by a bacteria called Bacillus anthracis. And there's actually 4 different forms of this. You can get it on your skin, in your lungs, in your intestines, or at an injection site. And symptoms can begin anywhere from 1 day after exposure all the way up to 2 months after the infection is contracted. If you get it on your skin, what you will see is you tend to get a blister that is painless, but it has a black center. So I'll just show you this picture here that I'm going to circle. You'll notice that you get this black blister on the skin. Or if you look at this poor arm over here that's been infected, you can see it's a pretty severe infection, and you get the blister happening. If you get it through inhalation, you tend to get like a fever, chest pain, shortness of breath. Intestinal, you're going to get diarrhea, likely bloody diarrhea, abdominal pains, nausea, vomiting. And so it's not a very nice illness to be dealing with. And it's spread by the contact of the bacterial spores. So if you breathe in these spores, you eat them, or if you've got a cut in your skin and they get in that way, that tends to be how anthrax is spread. It's usually not spread directly from person to person. Okay, well, the next one we're going to talk about is tetanus. And tetanus is caused by a bacteria called Clostridium tetani. And this is found in soil, it's found in dust, it's found in animal feces. And the problem is when this enters a wound, so let's say you step on a dirty nail, for instance, the spores from this bacteria will then get inside your body, grow into bacteria, and these bacteria produce this very powerful toxin. And this toxin will impair your nerves that control your muscles. So that's why you see in these pictures people are spasming because this toxin is actually affecting their muscles and their neurons. So there's a YouTube video here for you to watch as well on tetanus. And strep throat, you've probably all heard of strep throat. You've maybe even had strep throat. This is caused by streptococcal bacteria, and it's an infection of the back of the throat, and it tends to include the tonsils. And if you look at this picture here, you will see that this person has very inflamed tonsils, and you will also see this white running through them, indicating that they've got a fairly strong infection here. So again, this is caused by the streptococcus. So if you think back again to how bacteria are classified, that should give you an idea of what that would look like. But if you look at this picture here, remember the coccus is circular. So we've got the circular strands here, and the strepto is the long chains. So that's why this is called streptococcus. And if you get strep throat, you will likely have a fever. You're definitely going to have a sore throat, some red tonsils, and enlarged lymph nodes in the neck. You'll likely get a headache, nausea, vomiting, all sorts of things. If you look at the picture in the bottom left, trying to decide whether or not you've got strep throat or not is an important distinction, because if you've got a cold and you've got a sore throat, you do not want to go to the doctor and ask for antibiotics, because remember, antibiotics do not work on viruses, and that's what a cold is. A cold is caused by a viral infection. Strep throat is caused by a bacterial infection, and that's where, if you've got this, that is where antibiotics are actually going to work for you. So you're going to want to definitely go to your doctor and see and get their opinion on whether or not this is a cold or a bacterial infection, and whether or not you actually need antibiotics or not. So again, just a summary of the good and the bad. Some of the good bacteria are useful in the production of dairy products, in medical supplies like antibiotics, insulin, vaccines. They can actually clean up toxic waste, decompose dead matter, they help us in digestion, and they also are involved in nitrogen fixation. But sadly, they also have bad side effects like causing disease and spoiling of our food. But I think if you look at the big picture, for the most part, the benefits of bacteria outweigh the harm that they do cause. But some of the bacteria obviously cause pretty significant harm, which can result in death. So you have to just look at the big picture and look at both the good and the bad of bacteria.